that families in the Victorian era chose to photograph their loved ones after death and tried to make it look like nothing had changed. But that's not true, because even back then, not everyone could accept this. Some families held on to one last image, afraid to forget a face, a child, someone they loved too much to lose. But others refused to take these photographs at all. They couldn't stand them. They didn't want to see death looking like life. And that's the part no one talks about. Because what really happened was far more complicated and far more uncomfortable than people think. So the real question is, why did some people need these photographs and others refuse to even look at them? The answer isn't what people expect. Because behind that quiet, composed world, people were breaking. In the Victorian era, grief was controlled. It wasn't meant to be seen. No raised voices, no public collapse. From the outside, it looked like strength. But inside, it was something else entirely. Because loss didn't come gently. A child could be playing in their room one day and be gone the next. No warning, no time to understand it. Just silence where life had been. Or a young couple, only just beginning their life together, suddenly torn apart by something they couldn't fight. The person they believed would be there for years was simply no longer there. And what followed was almost unbearable. Because when someone is gone, they don't leave all at once. Everything about them begins to slip away. The sound of their voice, the way they looked at you, the small, ordinary details that made them feel real. And then, even their face, in memory, begins to soften, to blur, to slowly disappear with time. And for some, that was the hardest part. So they held on to anything they could. Anything that wouldn't change, anything that wouldn't fade, something that could stay when everything else was already slipping away. And for them, sometimes that meant one single photograph. And so, something changed. Not in the way people spoke, that remained restrained, almost careful, but in the way they tried to preserve what was already beginning to slip beyond their reach. Because for the first time, there was a way to keep an image from changing, not shaped by memory, not softened by time, but held exactly as it was, photography. It was slow, deliberate, unforgiving in its honesty. It did not interpret, it did not comfort. It simply showed what was there. And perhaps that is why it became so important in moments like these. Because it asked nothing of memory. It did not allow time to blur the details. It did not let the image drift into something gentler, something easier to bear. It remained clear, still, unchanged. And in a world where everything else could begin to fade, the kind of permanence felt almost necessary. For some families, this was not a strange act. It was the only way to hold on to something that would not slip away. But not everyone saw it that way. But this was not something every family accepted. Even then, there was no single way to face loss. What felt necessary to some felt deeply unsettling to others, and not always for reasons that could be easily explained, because there is something in these images that did not sit easily, something that lingered just beneath the surface. To those who looked at them, these photographs did something unsettling. They did not allow death to feel distant. They did not let it recede into memory. Instead, the image held the moment in place, too clearly, too steadily, as if what had happened had been fixed, instead of allowed to pass. And for some, that was harder to endure than absence itself. In these photographs, they did not see the person they loved. They saw the moment of death, and not everyone could bear that, because there was no softening, no quiet transformation into memory, no gentle distance between what was and what remained. Instead, there was an image that did not change, that did not fade, that did not let go. And not everyone wanted that. Some turned away from it, not because they loved less, but because they could not bear to see someone they had lost, held in that quiet, unnatural stillness, neither fully gone nor truly alive. So they chose something else, something quieter, something that allowed distance, something that could soften the truth, instead of preserving it exactly as it was. But not every family chose to keep that kind of image, a post-mortem photograph. Some turned away from it entirely, and instead, they held on to what remained: a ribbon, a piece of clothing, a lock of hair, carefully preserved, objects that had been touched, worn, held, things that carried the trace of a life, without fixing it to its ending. And sometimes, they turned to painted portraits, not to record what had happened, but to return, even briefly, to how that person had once been, not still, not silent, but familiar, recognizable, alive in a different way. Because for them, remembrance was not about accuracy. It was about closeness, about keeping something that could still be felt, not just seen, something that did not confront them with a single, final moment, but allowed the person to remain beyond it. And in the end, none of these choices were simple, because grief does not follow rules. What one person needed to hold on to, another could not bear to see. And yet, this way of remembering did not last. Slowly, almost without notice, it began to disappear. Not because people stopped grieving, but because the world itself was changing. Death was no longer something that remained inside the home. It was moving elsewhere, into hospitals, into institutions, away from everyday life. It became more distant, less visible, less present. And at the same time, photography was changing too. It was no longer reserved for the final moment. People were being captured while they were still alive. Their faces, already preserved, already remembered. And with that, the need to hold onto one last image began to fade, because the last moment was no longer the only one. But there was always someone else in the room, someone who did not belong to the family: the photographer. They were called in at a moment most people would never witness, and their role was not just to capture, but to arrange, to decide where to place the body, how to position it, how to hold the stillness, sometimes to make it appear as if nothing had changed. And in that quiet process, something unusual happened. Memory was no longer left to time. It was being shaped, deliberately, carefully, by someone who had never known the person they were preserving. And perhaps this is where the real question begins. What exactly were they trying to preserve? A person? Or the feeling that they were still there? Because an image can hold a face, but not a voice, not a movement, not the quiet ways someone once filled a room. And yet, for some, it was enough. Because sometimes, when everything is gone, even the illusion of presence can feel like something you cannot let go of. Something fragile, but real enough to hold on to. Real enough to sit beside. real enough to make the silence feel just a little less empty. And maybe that is why these photographs still feel so unsettling today. Not because they show death, but because they reveal how differently people try to hold on to life. So now I want to ask you, have you ever seen something like this in your own family? A photograph, a memory, something that was kept so that a person would never truly fade? Let me know in the comments. And if this story made you see these images differently, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.